and welcome to Glasgow in 2024 Presents. My name is Esther McCallum-Stewart and I'm the chair of the Glasgow in 2024 Worldcon bid, and I'm really excited to be introducing you to our online events. I hope you enjoy this event, and if you do, why not take a moment to see what else we have coming up online at glasgow2024.org. All of our events are broadcast live, but if you want to watch or listen again, you can find them all online at our YouTube channel. Please feel free to join in the conversation on social media. We'll be using the hashtag #GIN2024 across Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. And you can also find us there at Glasgow in 2024. If you would like to become a supporter of the bid, you can do so at glasgow2024.org/pre-support. Or if you want to volunteer to get involved, then please check out our volunteer page on our website. We can't currently be together, but we do hope we can bring a little bit of the Glasgow 2024 spirit and joy to you wherever you are in the world. Enjoy the event and thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and it's evening in Glasgow. It's evening in Dublin, where I am. My name is Brian Nisbet, and on behalf of Glasgow in 2024, and indeed our partners in this, Rebellion Publishing, very glad to introduce you to our event this evening. And what is that event? Well, it's talking to two wonderful authors about at least two wonderful books, which are very recently published, and having an opportunity to learn more about them, their work, the books, and giving an opportunity for questions and answers, and really hopefully some exploration over the next hour and a half, give or take. And this is, as Esther mentioned, one of a number of series of events, and we'll be talking more about that later. So coming to you live on the Zoom webinar, and indeed hopefully on our Facebook page, and I'm being told it is there, we have this event this evening. And with me we have Aliya Whiteley and Mike Carey. Do you want to both? Yes, welcome to you both. For hopefully what will be a fun and casual evening of chat. And the kind of the two books in focus there is Aliya's Skyward In and Mike's Fall of Cody. So Skyward In, a standalone piece, and Fall of Cody, the third in the Cody trilogy of books. I have had the honor and privilege of reading both of these over the last few weeks, and I'm just really excited to talk to you both about them. So I don't know, I mean, we're going to go into a reading. I don't know if you want to just briefly maybe introduce yourselves in your own words.
Yeah,
so
can do.
If you want to start? Yeah, please.
I'm Aliya Whiteley. I write novels, short stories, novellas, a little bit of non-fiction. Really like writing, been doing it for quite a long time now. And yeah, the latest book is Skyward In. So that's out from Solaris. And I'm going to read a little bit of that in a bit. Okay.
I'm Mike Carey, sometimes MR Carey, very occasionally Adam Blake. I like writing too. I do novels, short stories, comics. I did comics for a long time before I did anything else. Do screenplays when I can get them. And I'll be reading from actually I'll be reading from the Book of Klee, the first book in the trilogy, rather than the last one.
Well, we wouldn't want to have too many spoilers for those who hadn't started the trilogy. And we are now definitely streaming live on Facebook. So those of you who are watching on Facebook, welcome. You've joined us just in time. So yes, so I think what we're going to do is actually start with a reading from both of you. So again, Aliya, I'll pass over to you to start from Skyward In.
Okay, I've chosen a bit quite near the beginning. The main character, Jem, works in a pub, the Skyward Inn, and she's reminiscing with the help of the local beer, which is called Jarrow Brew, about time that she spent on another planet called Kita. So I'll just read a little bit from that. So I tell him again about market time. We were both there, but in different times, from different angles. I speak of it the way I remember it, mingled with the way it was told. The rules were explained to me before I arrived, because it was not the kind of place one could understand simply by looking and listening. It made no sense unless you knew how to see it, make sense of it. So I came with foreknowledge through Coach. Coach was the device implanted in my head by the coalition, providing for all my information and entertainment needs. How did Coach already know about Keaton life? I wonder. Keaton workers on the base? I had Coach removed years ago at the end of my contract, but it has left its ghosts. Sometimes I still ask a question to it, expecting an immediate answer to pop into my brain. Living that way can be addictive. I think maybe it's why I hate questions so much now. My thoughts need to be my own. Mine, and in the wake of Jarrow Brew, as I talk to you of our past, yours. A high stone wall surrounds the square in the centre of the bustling town. Traders queue at the start of each day to receive identical rectangular slabs from the market keeper. They're cut from the same stone as walls. Each one has a supple, shiny strap attached to one side, hung around the neck to balance the slab on the chest, creating a ledge upon which items for sale can be placed. When all the slabs are taken, the keeper takes up a weighty metal cylinder and swings it in a circle overhead. The loud peal of a bell pours forth. The traders are then admitted, and they walk clockwise inside the walls, while prospective buyers sit on the central benches in the shade thrown by the central cluster of fruiting trees. The small surface area of each trader's ledge means that Jarrow Brew is the most popular product to sell. A tall, transparent container is placed in the centre with glasses around it, in a design said to mirror the market itself. Often Jarrow Brew has colour or flavour added to it, and the glasses may be individually decorated. The displays can be elaborate and ingenious, but does that mean the brew is better? Not necessarily, but then this is all moot, at least in ways that I, a human, an outsider, can understand. The most inexplicable part to me is that no money changes hands. Locals insisted trade is the concept that explains Lang's Inn Square best, but this is not supply and demand. When the glasses have all been used and the container is empty, the trader must leave. It does a trader no good to offer a more or less popular product, not that they strictly offer it at all. On the day I visited, I was prepared. I did not approach the traders, which would have been considered impertinent. I sat in a shaded spot and waited for one to come to me. It took an age, and I felt so many eyes upon me. It was their chance to, at the very least, humiliate me for what I was, for what I represented. But then a trader came to me and said the words I had been hoping to hear. He spoke in his own language, then in Chinese, which I translated to English. I give if you take. He was tall, and his chin was even bigger than the usual, probably from years of wearing the strap upon it. His Jarrow Brew was plain, his glasses small and undecorated. The Keaton on my left shifted and tilted his head, I supposed jealousy on his part. I guessed this trader was well respected. What made him trade with me? To learn his classic phrase in other languages for just such a moment, what could I give him in return? To trade is the choice of the trader, not the necessity in Lang's Inn Square. It is the business of hunting by their own criteria. Do they look for those who seem in most need of their product, or those who might reciprocate one day? That, it seems, is their decision to make. I replied, I am yours and you are mine. A glass was poured and given. I drank down the brew and dreamed of a better earth. I don't think I'll ever taste anything as good again, but sometimes, Isley, sometimes after a long night on my feet and the thought of my son's disinterest in me biting, your best stuff comes close. I stopped talking. You know, says Isley, that's not strictly accurate about the ledges. What bit? The traders are meant to leave the market when they're sold out, but here's the thing, they have accomplices. Helpers have worked outside the walls to make very small tunnels slanted downwards through which Jarrow Brew can be poured. They wait outside, and at a set time the trader stops by their hole and refills their flask. Everyone knows it and it's tolerated. It's amusing, isn't it? We all think so. I picture the traders surreptitiously putting their flasks to the walls at their designated spots, filling up once more. I had missed that entirely when I was there, although I had watched them for hours, but then I wasn't looking for it. It's funny, I say, how you can learn the rules of a place, but not which rules are okay to break. There we go.
Thank you very much. Certainly, for me, set the scene of that alien world greatly when I reached that point in the book. So, and I think, you know, I keep on thinking of a list of similarities and differences between the two stories and the two sets of stories. But now I think, Mike, if you want to read a little from the Book of Klee, and then we'll go on with the discussion.
I would like that very much. Again, this is very close to the start of the story. It's Cody trying to explain what his world is like. It's a world of the far future, about 3 centuries from now, after the collapse of our global civilization. Everything that lives hates us, it sometimes seems, or at least they come after us like they hate us. Things we want to eat fight back hard as they can and oftentimes win. Things that want to eat us is thousands strong, so many of them that we only got names for the ones that live closest to us. And the trees got their own ways to hurt us, blunt or subtle, according to their several natures. There's shunned men too, that live in the deep forest and catch and kill us when they can. Nobody knew back then who the shunned men was, whether they was just the faceless that had been thrown out of other villages, or if they had got a village of their own that was hid somewhere. But they were monstrous cruel and worse than any beast. Against these things, we of myth and rude, like every settlement of humankind, put up walls, hollowed out stake blinds, set sentries, tried everywhere we could to pitch our own hate against the world's hate, giving back as good or as bad as we got. We digged ourselves in and weathered it, for what else was there to do? Each season brung its own terrors down on us. In winter, the cold could freeze your fingers off if you weren't wary, and snow fell on top of snow until you couldn't make your way without web spreads or walkers. The snow was mostly just water set hard, but sometimes it had silver in it, and that was dangerous. If you drank snow melt and didn't sieve out the silver first, it could make you sick in your stomach. Old ones and babies could even die of it. In spring, the snow thawed, which was a mercy, but sometimes, maybe one time in 4 or 5, it would be a choker spring, and you would get something else coming alongside the thaw. Of all our mortal threats, I was most mightily afraid of the choker seeds, because they attacked so fast and was so hard to fight. If a seed fell on your skin, you had only got just a few seconds to dig it out again before the roots went in too deep. After that, there wasn't nothing anyone could do for you except to kill you right away before the seedling hollowed you out. In myth and rude, our answer to that was to try to stop the seeds from falling in the first place. As soon as the warmer weather come, Rampart Fire, which in my day was capturing the nesting, would send out runners to check the choker trees for blossom. If they found any, she would strap on the fire thrower and walk the forest. Rampart Remember would plot her route, and 10 strong spearmen would journey at her side while she burned out the blossoms before the trees could seed. The spearman was to kill or fend off any beasts that might come, watching Catherine's back and her 2 sides while she played the fire thrower across the branches and seared the seeds inside their pods. Against the choker trees themselves, there wasn't any protecting that would avail, so Catherine and her spearmen only went out on days when the clouds was thick and heavy, and if the sun began to show through, they run as fast as they could for the clear ground. Summer was hardest because most things was woke and walking then. Night strikes flying straight down out of the sun, so you couldn't see them coming, mole snakes out of the ground, rats and wild dogs and needles out of the forest. Anything that was big and come by its own lonely self was give to Thur Van Esten to deal with. Thur was Rampart Arrow. She would take the creature down with one of her smart bolts. And if it was a drone that come dropping out of the sky and throwing out its scary warning, one of Thur's bolts would oftentimes do for that too. But she had only just got the 3 of them, which meant someone always had to go out to bring the bolt back afterwards. We couldn't afford to lose none. If wild dogs or rats or night strike swarms come, we had a different way, which was Rampart Knife. Luke Van Esten had that name when I was younger. Then Mardew passed the test, and it was given to him when Luke died. When a swarm attacked, Rampart Knife would stand up on the fence or on the lookout and carve the beast into pieces as they come. Then we would cook and eat the meat, as long as there was no worms or melters in it. Wormed meat or melted meat we kept well clear of, for even if you digged out what you could see, there was always a lot more you couldn't. I got to say, our fights against the rats was far between. Mostly it was hunters that seen them, a pack of ours crossing paths with a bunch of theirs in the deep woods and both going on their way, but watching each other out of sight with spears all up on our side and teeth and claws out on theirs. Lots of people wondered how the rats could come through the forest even in the warmest weather, for it was plain they didn't fear the sun. Then one time, Aliya, Rampart Remember, talked to the database about it. The database said the rats had got something inside them that sweated out onto their skin when the sun came out and kind of stopped the choker trees from closing tight on them, or choker seeds from breaking open on them, growing down into their bodies. I guess I don't need to tell you how wonderful a thing that would have been for us, to be able to walk through the forest without fear. Trees was our biggest problem always, and the reason why we lived the way we did. The reason why there was a clear space inside the fence, 50 strides wide, that we burned with fire and sowed with salt. The reason why we never went out to hunt, except on days when there was rain or thick overcast, and why the dog days of summer meant dried meat if you was lucky, root mash and hardtack if you wasn't. The reason why we seen the world as being made up out of 3 parts, which was the village, the little strip between the fence and the stake blind that we called the hearth outside, and everything else beyond.
Great, thank you very much. I know the first walk I took after reading in that first book through the Phoenix Park near my house, I was suddenly very much more aware of the trees. It's funny.
Yes, I find the same thing. Kind of walking through the park thinking, oh, I hope these trees are friendly.
My work here is done.
So for those watching, and thank you both for those readings, and again, really good, just short pieces, but really give the flavor of the books. Through the event, you can ask questions, whether that's on Facebook or in the Q&A function of the webinar there, and we'll either bring them in at an appropriate time for those watching, or we'll have a very defined piece of questions and answers at the end. So please do type them in there, and just because we haven't answered them, we will get to them to in one way or another. So for me, I suppose that the first thing I want to say is both of these books had such a sense of place. So I'm Irish, but I know the geography of the island next door pretty well. But that said, I found myself looking through them, looking at the place names and just trying to get a feel for the geography of them. And they both really came across as very clearly things that were happening in a very defined place. So I suppose kind of to start, I would ask, how important was that to you when sitting down to write the books? And would you feel they're stories that could be translated somewhere else, or was that presence in England or part of England a core part of the story?
For me, I would say I didn't spend an awful lot of time thinking about it beyond, I set quite a lot of stuff in Devon because I grew up there. I know it really well, so it's kind of my default starting point. But obviously the landscape informs it greatly. And as soon as I'd worked out that I was thinking a lot about Jamaica in the context of the novel, then I knew it had to be the West Country. But also when I had the idea for the book, I was driving back from visiting Devon and was going through that landscape anyway. And so it just kind of informed it in that sense. And I think, you know, it's a story that you could tell about many rural places quite effectively. It's just that Devon is my stomping ground. So it seems to be my default setting when it comes to writing. First thing that comes to mind.
With me, it was partly because the middle book of the trilogy was always going to be a journey, and the journey was always going to end in London. It was always going to end in the south. And Britain, mainland Britain, being as small as it is, it kind of limited my choices as to where it started. I'm a northerner myself, so initially I was thinking I'd maybe make it Merseyside, which is where I grew up. But in the spring of the year when I started writing, I did a guest appearance at an Arden seminar in Lumbank. So I got to see the Calder Valley, the incredible beauty of that landscape. And I thought, it's for a story that's about isolated settlements, the villages in Cody's England are very much cut off from each other. The sort of the rugged landscape of that part of Britain makes a lot of sense. So it could have been somewhere else, but it seemed very, very logical to set it there.
And in both of the stories, so you've just kind of described a connection to one extent or another with the places that you set those stories. And indeed, Mike, you mentioned the beauty of the Calder Valley, and you've then kind of taken that and in different ways altered it. I would hesitate to say perverted it, but maybe in the case of the Cody books, indeed you have.
I think that's fair.
And of course the Devon in Skyward Inn is quite different to the Devon that is there today, I'm told. I mean, again, haven't left Dublin in a year. Who knows what's happened in the outside world? Was there anything behind that of kind of going, this is a beautiful place, I want to make it deadly, or this is a place I know so well and I want to change it from that?
Aliya?
I knew it was going to be a book about change in landscape. I think many books at the moment are, in the sense that climate change is a pervasive force that sits over all novels that we write in the present or the near future, unless you go very far future and deal with it that way. So yeah, it was already about changing landscape, but in the sense the book is also about nostalgia and memory of place, which I think is true of the Cody books as well.
Very much so.
Yeah, so you have to kind of accept you're on a journey through the landscape as well as a journey through the characters' lives, and the physical journeys they undergo as well. So the journey of the landscape kind of effectively mirrors that character journey, I think. So the landscape is in flux. Yeah, it's never still. And I think both books draw attention to that.
Yes, although you use it in a very, very different way from me, I think, as the story goes on. Yeah, I agree with everything that Aliya just said. Cody's world is one that is kind of like the logical endpoint, both of the sort of the climate breakdown that we're seeing at the moment, or starting to see at the moment, and also of the geoengineering, the human interventions that were meant to stop it or postpone it. So it's very much the landscape of the present, but inflected through those processes. And there was I had this kind of idea in my head that there would be a journey through space and a journey through time. That as Cody goes south, and then as he goes out to sea, he's discovering his world, and he's also eventually coming to discover the way our world became his world, the processes that led to that point.
And I suppose that's, and Aliya, you kind of already almost took the words out of my mouth when I was looking at this. Both books, the landscape has changed. I think to more of a degree in Cody than in Skyward, but it's climate change is an ever-present piece, even as something which is kind of mentioned only a couple of times in one and is a core piece in the other. And I think, as you mentioned, is it possible right now to write science fiction without reference to that? Or I mean, is it just something that sits as a shadow in all of the books or the stories we're looking at right now?
I think there's a place for all permutations of looking at climate change, or choosing not to make it a feature in what you write, to be honest. And the role of science fiction as escapism as well. You know, it's important that we look at the problem and also provide places that are a rest from the problem. I think Skyward Inn is very, as you say, very much less concerned with it on a daily basis, apart from it's about the way things can't be separated out of or avoided. So therefore it's useless of the protectorate, this kind of area of Devon that decides to be separate, to say, well, you know, we've seceded from the rest of the world, so therefore climate change isn't really an issue for us. I mean, you know, it's like the land itself. It's not something you can decide to be part of or not. So I'd say, like, the echoes of it probably sit underneath it, whether you choose to deal with it or not when you write. But I don't think every piece of science fiction has to openly address it, perhaps. Yeah.
The Klee books are post-apocalyptic sci-fi, obviously, and I think we've always furnished our apocalypses from the things that were ready to hand. We've always used them as a way of exploring the the nightmares that are haunting us at the present moment. So we are seeing an awful lot of climate breakdown apocalypses of one sort or another. I guess as the series went on, it sort of, at a certain point, it starts to be more about, or at least as much about, artificial intelligence and what you do with it as it is about climate change. So it's a strand. It's a very important strand. Like Aliya, I wouldn't see it as inevitable, but the temptation to go there, I think, is very, very strong, because how do you stop picking at the scab, or probing the loose tooth?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I certainly got, it's that feeling at the moment where we're going to have films which at some point will be set in 2020 or 2021, and they'll probably have people in rooms shaking hands, and will that be its own kind of fiction? But I suppose it was, and that's the question: is how believable will a book be if it's just ignored, versus something where there's the line that just says, "And they fixed it."
I like those books, though. I like it when we just fix things. But yes, but isn't that the big challenge, to write the books in which we fix things?
I mean, whether in depth or just briefly, just go, everything got better.
It's done. It's okay.
I think we may have a respite in the years immediately to come from plague apocalypses. I think people will probably steer clear of them because we've been there, we've lived it already.
I have to say, my last two books both contained, viruses, and I'll be damned if I write another book with a virus in. There's a virus in the, or at least there's a plague in the middle book of the Cody trilogy. And I kind of wished I hadn't had that in. Once COVID arrived, I thought, I should have chosen some other way, some other challenge for Spirit to deal with. It's the virus is kind of shorthand, isn't it? The virus is, the thing that creates the situation that you need. But now the word is just so much more loaded in every way possible. You can't just say, "Oh, it's a virus."
Yeah,
write it off. So
my family and I rewatched Contagion a couple of nights ago. It's absolutely uncanny when you watch it now. It's a completely different experience watching it now, because it predicts so many of the things that we've just lived through.
I don't think I could face it. Were you just feeling very, very brave? Because I don't know if I'm up for virus literature yet.
it was scratching the scab again.
I mean, I will admit that piece in the Trials of Cody I was like, when was he writing this? But of course, it's all about the present thing. It's people have written many books about and many stories about illnesses and viruses, and it just so happened. But it certainly made a difference. I think the reading of it to me you know, in the middle of this, it was a lot more impactful than it might otherwise have been. I don't think I could sit down and watch Contagion. No.
I actually recommend it. It's really fascinating.
The other, and where I'm sure we're going to come back to a number of these themes, but one of the things I noticed, and I will admit that this may come from my view of pieces and coming from somewhere that is not the UK, is not the island of Great Britain, but without even touching on some of the larger political pieces that are in there, especially perhaps in the, you know, on a human political level, from a, sorry, all politics is human, from a geographic, it seemed there seemed to also be a theme of the making Britain or England smaller, a fall of that. And I kind of mentioned the specific place, but there seemed to be a lot of that as well in both books. And I reading Skyward, talking about the coalition, I was almost reminded of Landing Strip 1 as a concept of the, you know, further from 1984, or indeed, and now someone's gonna you know, hunt me down, the 2000 AD story, long-running story where England is in Britain is invaded and the rebels who are fighting against it. But anyway, certainly that piece of kind of making the UK lesser. I don't know if that was something you want to talk about.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Well, certainly, you know, Cody's world is a tiny world. One of the consequences of the entire biosphere effectively turning against the human race, or becoming really inimical to what's left of humanity, is that the horizon is shrunk. Up until the middle of the first book, Cody's lived his entire life in the Calder Valley. He's lived his entire life in about a 5 or 6 mile radius of the village where he was born, and venturing outside the gate is a significant thing. It's a thing you have to prepare for. It's a thing you don't do lightly. And so, yeah, part of the point, I think, was to sort of shrink things in and then explode them outwards again, to sort of show him venturing out, just rediscovering the world. You know, he goes to London, he goes beyond London. And if I ever revisit the world, I think ultimately some of the characters are going to end up in mainland Europe. So yeah, it is about space, about restricting it, but then also about sort of opening up a new perspective inside it.
Yeah, your use of the word diminishment really struck a chord with me. I think I've been very interested in the last couple of books of starting very small in these sort of diminished worlds, and then trying to go as large as possible, kind of outwards into the universe, galaxies, other planets, and to not lose that sense of immediacy as well. So I think for me, it's about, you know, the challenge of starting so small with what's essentially a one-room play almost to begin with, if you know what I mean, and then spreading outwards from there. So and viewing things as separate cells or units almost that build up. Yeah, that was kind of the thought in my mind, to have these separate sections that come together and form to create something bigger. Yeah.
Yeah, you have this wonderful concept in Sky Within of the kissing gate. So a sort of a template for space exploration that's basically just our little chunk of space being suddenly conjoined Siamese twin-wise with another bit of space. Which I thought was amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it was, again, kind of the attempt to keep it small while it's huge, if you know what I mean. So it's like we're not exploring the entire space. We've just been given this sudden access to one more part of the puzzle. And you only sort of glimpse the entire puzzle quite very late on in the book, really, I think. So yeah, I liked the idea that you were just sort of moving from one place to another and still not really seeing the big picture. Yeah,
and just reverting to old patterns of behavior to the
moving your
colonial
behavior
model.
from one place to the next. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, that kind of, you know, I suppose the smallness was very clear in both of them. You know, I think for the sense of claustrophobia almost of both with the trees and with the size of the valley in the Calder and how far it was safe to go. And then just the political and economic restrictions, albeit in Skyward Inn, they're self-imposed, possibly generationally handed down, but self-imposed. Yeah. Whereas in Cody, yeah. They're also arguably self-imposed, but
no, I would say they were, right? I mean, it's about fear. So both those communities are fearfully patrolling their borders in Mike's world for really, really good reasons. But you know, both books do a similar thing in that they expand outwards from that initial fear. Yeah, I think that fear is the overriding thing that's happening within the community.
And I guess they also both ultimately show the futility of patrolling a border. You know, the futility of walls in the final analysis.
Yes, I suppose there's always going to be some way in, or someone who can huff and puff in an appropriate way. Sorry, excuse me. And I think, you know, you both said, and we were discussing this beforehand, we looked at that, and I think that the walls and the journey both out of them and into them, very much books are about communities and individual reactions to those communities. And I must admit, one of the hardest things I found in reading the books was reading a book about a pub full of people having a good time. It was quite a wrench, but that sense of community was very, very clear.
There's another level of nostalgia, right? That managed to unexpectedly get into that. Yeah, so there's a very strong community there, and I tried hard to show both the pluses and minuses of that. I didn't want it to be, you know, a rose-tinted picture of what that is, but at the same time, there's undeniably really strong bonds. Much is the same as Mike's book. You know, there are terrible things happening under the surface of Coley's community. The lies that are told in order to keep that community going, but by the same token, that doesn't negate the beauty of what is being made there in some way, if you see what I mean. It's yeah, it's not straightforward.
No, I think you know, for the second book onwards, well, the first book is about sort of Coley finding a family, for want of a better word, but from the second book onwards, you sort of got the split focus. You've got the hero quest on the one hand, but you've also got what's happening in Myth and Root, Spinner's story, which is very much about the community weathering various crises. You know, it's arguably not a hero narrative. It's something else that kind of stands in opposition to what Coley and his ragged band are doing. It's much more about just survival.
And I think there's a similar, I suppose there's a similar narrative in Skyward as well. In some ways, it's when Foss makes the decisions he makes, and you know, the people who are still at home as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As you say, I think in Mike's books there's a much stronger reason that's understandable for these kind of acts. Whereas in mine, it's much more sort of ephemeral, you know, who is the enemy and what is it that we're against? In a sense, you know, they're against technology, they're against modern life in some way that's really difficult to kind of put your finger on. So I'm not sure with Mike's book so much whether, you know, if all the technology did come to life, if they would do something to shut it up again in a way, or yeah. Do you think?
Well, you have you have a sort of plethora of technology coming in book 3. Yeah, that there is Coley gets access to a whole lot of technology, much more than he ever dreamed he would see in his lifetime. And then there was a dialogue between him and Monono about what you do with that, because it changes the equation, it changes the balance of power between humankind and the rest of the biosphere.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in Skyward Inn there's much more of a there's a sense of not knowing a lot of the time what kind of story you're reading and what genre it's going to resolve in.
Yeah.
I was just reading the LA Times review of it actually, which uses the phrase Cronenbergian body horror, and also the phrase lyrically repulsive, which I thought was great.
Like that. Yeah.
but that's sort of ambiguity about what ballpark the story is eventually going to land in is a really powerful thing. I think it is in Greensmith as well. Sorry.
Thank you.
That wasn't a question, it was just an observation.
No, thanks. Yeah, I love the surprise of it when you don't. I think quite often genre feels like a safe pair of hands. And I love that. And quite often I'm in the mood for that. But every so often I'm in the mood to not know where something's going. And then you know, that's what I tend to be drawn to when I write, I think. But yeah, I really wanted the more horrific aspects to sneak up quietly behind the reader in Skyward Inn. Yeah, whereas I think there's actually quite a lot of horror in Coley as well, actually, and that also sneaks up on you, strangely enough. I'm thinking of the third book, once they start to uncover what's really going on in the broadcast that they've been trying to find. I won't spoil anything, but there's some really quite horrific stuff going on there too.
There's also some creature feature stuff. Yeah, there's some enjoyable monsters. I hope. I like a good monster.
Me too. Yep.
And I mean, I think that's, you know, Skyward starts in a world that I think is easier to recognize than Coley. You know, but it's that piece where Skyward goes off through the Kissing Gate into another world with non-humans. Whereas Coley is a story about mostly about humans and all set on Earth. But as you say,
it does have a great non-human though, doesn't it, in the form of Monono, who's absolutely wonderful. So yeah,
has to be one of my favorite characters I've read in quite a while. You know, I must admit that Monono and Spinner, Cody's probably third, probably. You know, he's great, but the two of them are fantastic.
Cody turns out to be strangely polarizing. Some of the reviews have said, yeah, even where they've really enjoyed the book, that they find Coley infuriating because he's so passive and he's so much of a sort of a milksop. I think was a word that was used.
Oh no, I loved him. You know, he becomes, he's on his journey, right? So he becomes very, very much more kind of aware, but he's never in the same league as Monono. But you couldn't be, could you? So yeah.
No. I mean, the thing he's got going for him is just that he's incredibly well-meaning. He always tries to do the right thing, even when he has no idea what that might be. A very, very different sort of young adolescent male character than Foss. They kind of don't overlap at all.
No, I thought much the same thing, actually. They're very different creations. You feel the goodness kind of emanating from Coley. As you say, he's very, very well-meaning, and I'm not sure Foss could say to be the same, although he's looking for community. He's looking for, you know, the similar sort of things that Coley's looking for, but they approach it in very different ways, don't they?
Yeah, and there's a frightening edge to Foss. I think there's a sense that you never quite know what he's capable of, what he's going to do in any given situation.
Yeah.
Which obviously plays out very powerfully in the middle of the book, but becomes relevant in a different way when he's sorry, no spoilers, when he's in a different place.
I think that's allowed. But I mean, Coley is a, I feel you know, it's a safe pair of hands in a in that, again, you say he makes those decisions and it's well-meaning. And I think we're very used to characters like that who aren't, who do, you know, who do make the kind of decisions that Cody doesn't.
Well, there was I was at a convention in Canada when Ursula Le Guin was still alive, and she was the guest of honor. And she used this phrase in one of the panels, the redemptive act of violence. Pardon me. That so many of the narratives, so many of the stories we tell ourselves are about redemptive acts of violence. The climax is the protagonist performing a violent act and through it being transformed or transforming the world, or both. And she said that was a story that she had no interest at all in telling. She said she was much more interested in stories about marriage, that the abiding theme of her work was marriage, which I think is something that you could probably say as well, Aliya.
Yeah, I think so. I think, yes, how we come together, particularly love in all its forms, I think is absolutely something I'm writing about, in that sense of not really knowing what you're writing about until much later. And then you think, oh, I'm probably writing about that. Do you know what I mean? It's not, yeah. But yeah, coming together, and there is violence in Skyward Inn. There's violence in all my books, but I think I try really hard to never make it an end point.
Yeah.
I don't view it as a very good end point in terms of characterization, certainly. Although, you know, it can be very, very powerfully a conclusion. As you say, I can see exactly what Le Guin's getting at there. You know, so often in stories, it's that final fist fight or whatever that sums everything up nicely, and victory is established and off we go. But I don't know if I'm interested in victory either particularly. So that's probably why I haven't gone down that route. Yeah.
And it's probably why the third book in the Grandpa trilogy is called The Fall of Cody. I mean, there is a victory of sorts, but it's only part of the focus.
Yeah. Victory achieved at a price, I think, is much more interesting than a straightforward, clear cut. We've won. Let's go have a party.
Yes.
Yeah. Although I love a party, so yeah.
If only we had a handy pub. But I think The Fall of Cody was a title that I was like, how it intrigued me. It really did. I was like, okay, what is this? What is the fall going to be? And I think obviously the readers get to experience that. But one of the things, and I think it was the point that both of you raised in the conversations before this discussion, was really one of the core pieces of both of the books, which comes down to the nature of consciousness, to the nature of sentience as well, and you know, what we are, what we can become, what influences have on us. So, you know, was that when you were setting out to write these books, was that at the core of what you wanted to examine, or was it something that kind of came out of the story?
A good few years ago now, I did a panel at a convention about achieving utopia, and a lot of the things that were said there stuck with me, in particular sort of aspects of if you need to achieve togetherness of thought, of emotion in order to create utopia. So I think it's probably to do with that. As an idea, you know, can you achieve individualism, keep individualism, but achieve utopia? I don't know. If I knew, that would be great. If anybody does, that'd be cool. But it's yeah, I'm certainly the thing, you know, something that I'm writing about in Skyward Inn. Yeah,
it was a small part of Cody when I originally planned it, you know, mostly through the character of Monono, but so I always intended to have the point where she sort of cuts her tethers and starts to become capable of learning and changing herself, being modified by experience. But then in the second book, I introduced Challenger, and in the third book, Elaine Sandberg, and the characters on board Sword of Albion. And suddenly I realized this is a narrative that's kind of replete with non-organic consciousnesses. There are robots and androids and AIs of every flavor. And it kind of it crept up on me. It became a much bigger part of the story, quite pleasurably for me, than I'd originally intended. And it's kind of stuck in my head to the point where the next novel is kind of entirely about it.
Wow. I love the way Monono evolves. I don't know if that's even the right word for it, but you know, you get the sense more and more as the books go on that you're not dealing with something. It starts off as quite a familiar sort of presence, and then just gets further and further away from that to be actually quite frightening, really.
Yes, I enjoyed writing her point of view at last and making it be completely different from, hopefully completely different from what the reader was expecting. She's not a manic pixie dream girl at all. That's just a voice that's a voice that's been imposed on her.
It's I've played a lot of Mass Effect in my time, the computer game. I don't know if either of you are familiar with it.
I have it, but I've never played it. My daughter got it for me as a gift. But, sorry.
No. I mean, it is a fantastic story. I mean, that's the thing. There's a lot of shooting people, but mostly it's about the story. And in that story, there is an untethered AI. There is someone who goes well beyond the bounds of their original programming, and it's a big story point, you know, when you make that decision. And that person actually ends up in a body. And when I was telling my wife about Monono, she was saying it's a reverse Edie. It's someone going from that body to be much more. But it is that piece around the consciousness. But admittedly, you know, I suppose in Cody, all the consciousnesses, they are individual.
Yes.
I mean, individuals as part of a community, so it's.
Well, whereas in Skyward Inn, there's very much an exploration of the limits of individual experience and transcending those limits.
Yeah, and the Keatons is this other sort of set of beings that don't share, you know, similar ideas of individuality. And I liked the idea of that not really being something that we could ever even begin to grasp. I mean, we have kind of ideas of what that might be like from looking at insects or things like that on this planet, but then kind of beyond description. I mean, that's the age-old thing with science fiction, right? Is to try and describe the things that you couldn't possibly actually describe. And I like those hard limits of what are we dealing with here? What is this? Yeah, and consciousness is certainly part of that. I think it must be very different for Keatons. But in a way, even, you know, I couldn't really put my finger on or know. Yeah, it would make it interesting if I can explore it again, you know, from a different point of view, perhaps. It's, I think, the only book of mine I've thought about revisiting to do something from a different point of view, maybe.
If the clues are there, the small clues are there right from the start, aren't they? When Jem describes in the passage you read, the selling, except it's not selling of Jarrow Brew. It's not a market. There's no actual trade.
Yeah,
they're giving away experience because, you know, trade doesn't make sense if you're a Keaton. If you have that.
Yeah, we'd view it as like a form of capitalism almost, but that's really not what's going on there at all. And you can't really know what's going on there unless you were Keaton, I guess. So. Yeah.
When I was at school, I had an English teacher, George Lucy. He's dead now. He passed away last year, and we used to have huge arguments about science fiction. He liked science fiction, but he said that science fiction ultimately had to fail in its goal, because it could never truly present an alien viewpoint. It could never escape from the sort of the human mindset. And I think in Greensmith and Skyward Inn, you've actually sort of been pushing really hard against that wall. It's beautiful to see. You know, to comedic effect for a lot of the time in Greensmith, and quite horrifically and terrifyingly in Skyward Inn.
I do feel like I've been throwing myself against that wall. I would say, you know, in terms of your teacher's point of view in science fiction, if you look at it that way, then all literature is doomed to fail, because it's all about trying to look at somebody else's life as accurately and completely as possible, right? I mean, and that's always doomed to failure. So we're all doomed to failure. I'm okay with that.
Is autobiography the only thing we can ever write?
And even then, we can't expect anybody else to read it and get it. So, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
So this is fascinating for me. Certainly, we have a few questions from some of the viewers in the webinar and from Facebook, so we might go there and see where that takes us over the next little while. So we've got a few here that we're gonna. I think that the first one and easiest, Clara Cohen asks, Mike, regarding the evil trees, do you suffer from hay fever?
I don't, but my kids do. My kids suffer terribly from hay fever. So yeah, they probably always had this sense that the biosphere is out to get us.
That's strange, because Brian and I were just saying before we started how hay fever season is upon us and we both suffer. So yeah.
I was invited to DragonCon a few years back, and somebody said to me, you know, they have the biggest pollen in the world. They have pollen the size of footballs. So I live in terror of the southern states of America.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, you talk about some of the horror aspects in Skyward. Choker seeds are, I mean, and the further explanation of them as we get through, as they talk about them in more detail when the group are in many fishes, and I was like, oh, that's it seems initially like you might have a chance, and then reading about them later, I'm like, oh no, that's just not good at all. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it did come across as there's all things of orbs of tentacles leaping out of them, of lashing into flesh, which have cropped up in other places as well.
There's so much horror in nature, isn't there? I mean, there are plants like milkweed, where if your cow grazes on it and then you drink the milk of the cow, you die. And there's a tree in Southeast Asia which has acid on its bark. So if you shelter under it during a storm, you get acid burns. The water splashing off the tree will burn you. Crazy stuff.
So Murray Cohen asks a question about Jarrow brew. You read a part in your book about colour added to the brew. Were you providing a segue to the oft-times discussed issue among single malt drinkers regarding adding caramel colouring to spirit, which can diminish the purity and taste of it?
You know, oddly, yeah, that kind of plays a part in it, because the initial idea for the book came, as I said, I was driving back from Devon, and there was a documentary on Radio 4 about a Japanese man who'd gone to Scotland to set up a pub in the Highlands that would sell Japanese whiskey, and he was talking about you know, that experience and the kind of sense of camaraderie that crossed cultures, and you know, the same product but viewed from an entirely different sort of cultural lens, and that was really the inspiration for it. So Jarrow brew does have sort of affiliation with whiskey, funnily enough.
Though presumably in one place you spell it Jarrow brew and the other place Jarrah brew or something.
Yeah.
It is one of the biggest ongoing issues with the Glasgow in 2024 bid committee is you know, we've had them spelling whiskey with an E for Dublin 2019 obviously for years, and now I have to admit that maybe we can spell it without now and again. It's a trial. So from Rosa Maria Moreno Rondondo, who's actually doing she's working on a PhD on one of your novels, Mike, a PhD candidate.
Wow.
Two questions, but I think there might be some crossover between them. But it seems your novels display the natural apocalypse in a way that plants thrive, at least post plants, but animals are mostly absent. I wonder why. Have you ever considered a non-anthropomorphic, anthropocentric exploration of extinction from a non-human animal's perspective?
Oh, yes, very much so. I mean, there are still animals that survive. I think over the course of the 3 books, you get introduced to sea bears and needles and knife strikes. Oh my! But yes, I mean, extinction. I mean, we're living through a mass extinction event. You know, the percentage of all the species on Earth that have become extinct over the past few centuries is terrifying and tragic. I think one of the books that's made the most profound impact on me, one of the most non-fiction books that I've read, is Wonderful Life by Stephen Jay Gould, which is an exploration of the Burgess Shale, a soft-bodied fossil fauna from just after the Precambrian explosion. So the very start of multicellular life. And there are all these radically weird, wacky body plans. I mean, I think you've got the first, the ancestor of the first chordate, the first creature with a spine is in there, but alongside all these crazy body plans that just died out, that never went anywhere. The one or other extinction along the way finally did fall. And you realize there was nothing inevitable about humans. There was nothing inevitable about mammals. It was just one thread that happened to work. So yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by that, by the sort of the accidental nature of the history of life on Earth, and the miracle of us making it this far. You know, whenever I get depressed about what a mess we're making of the world right now, I cheer myself up by thinking, well, at least we got here, at least we had this.
Indeed. There's a follow-up question I want to ask you, Aliya, but it's too deep into the book, and it would be, I think, and I just shouldn't. I'll let. But
Ask me later.
It's something I'd love. Yes, indeed, I'd love to discuss with you at a later point in time. So the other question from there is the girl with all the gifts. Mike presents how education through stories and connected to human experience is able to make the post-human children become humane. The Rampart trilogy presents scattered knowledge. Characters are mostly self-educated, their stories disconnected from the past. Is this one of the reasons why they cannot succeed? And what's your take on the difference in education?
I think, yeah, there's definitely the sense that one of the ways in which Cody's world is impoverished is that it is so profoundly cut off from understanding of its own roots. And you realize in book 3 that didn't happen by accident, that literacy was suppressed and knowledge of history was suppressed by politicians and leaders for specific and immediate reasons. Obviously, we're living in a world right now where the way in which our connection to our own past is presented to children in schools is suddenly massively up for grabs and massively controversial. You know, where we have a government that's trying to impose a certain view of history and a certain orthodoxy in ways that I personally find profoundly disturbing. But to the point of stories, I think the stories that we tell ourselves define who we are. I think we have DNA that defines our physical form, and we have stories that define our identities as individuals, as families, as communities, as nations. And some of those stories are helpful and good, and some of them are toxic and awful. But yeah, I guess all that stuff was bubbling under to a large extent in the Rampart trilogy, and I think some of it was in Skyward Inn as well. Skyward Inn explores our past through the lens of a possible future.
Yeah, creating stories from the past, from memory, you know, that are completely untrustworthy, and the way that that's used to further certain people's aims and not others. I think that's something that turns up a lot in my books generally. Absolutely fascinated with stories, as you say, the ones that we tell ourselves being as helpful or pernicious or as anything else, but also communal stories and the importance of those. You know, in the Protectorate, this kind of region of Devon has strong feelings about its own past and the stories that are told in regards to that. Yeah, and there's a bit quite late on in the book, where the doctor of the village talks about his role in the community and his feeling of being part of the place, that was very much influenced by part of the life and death of Colonel Blimp. There's a speech late on in that about England. I think Anton Walbrook gives it. I love that film, and it was a very late addition to the book, but I liked that opportunity to say something about nostalgia and story and memory and their place within the community.
There was a book that came out about 15 years ago called On the Origin of Stories. I can't remember who wrote it, but it was taking a Darwinian view of storytelling. I think ultimately in a way that was quite reductionist and silly, but there was an interesting idea at the core of it, which is that all human civilizations, all human cultures tell stories, and that they do it for, at least partly, for evolutionary reasons. And the guy drew a comparison with play behavior in animals. Kittens learn how to hunt by mimicking, by playing aggression, and by playing hunting behaviors. And so they're expanding their behavioral repertoire through play. And in the same way, humans expand their behavioral repertoire and their emotional repertoire through exposure to story. Stories are kind of a form of taking you beyond the limits of your lived experience into other people's lived experiences and allowing you to profit from that.
I can totally see that. And as well, you know, the evolutionary nature of stories just as a tool in order to teach effectively. I can think of no way that humans learn better than with having a story element, a narrative presented to them about the boy who ate the berry off the bush over there, and then something awful happened to him. I mean, it's just that straightforward in a way, and evolving from there.
And I think
sorry,
I was just going to say, one of the things that Terry Pratchett always said was, you know, the Pans Narrans, the storytelling ape, was you know, how he defined humanity. I have always admittedly said Pans Narrans Ludens, because the playing in horrendous pig Latin or otherwise, but the playing of games, and certainly the games with rules, I think is an additional, it brings a lot of that together. And it's one of the things where oftentimes with people who aren't fans or readers or indeed writers, and you'll say we all tell stories, and they'll go, no, I don't. I'm not a storyteller. And you're like, well, what were you doing around the water cooler the other day? What how do we teach people? And it's exactly that, you know.
Yeah, we're all doing it.
There's a lovely couplet from the American poet Wallace Stevens. It is a child that rocks itself to sleep, the mind, among the creatures that it makes.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
so I'm gonna move on to a couple of the other questions. We're gonna try and finish around half 8, because again, that's the time we agreed, but we'll get through a couple of other things, although I do feel I could just talk to you both all evening. So from Luke Swanzinger, a question for both of you. How did your changing landscape shape your discoveries and themes concerning how societal structure is impacted by this altered, different landscape?
That's a hard question.
So initially, I mean, in terms of climate change and the changing landscape with Devon, there's that sense that it was Devon and Cornwall were going to be cut off. So that immediately sort of impacted in terms of, as I said, you know, there's, I knew I was telling a story about isolationist tendencies anyway, and that the climate change and events to do with that might well reflect that in the future anyway. Yeah, so, and then from my point of view, there are things that I wouldn't want to spoil in the book to do with sort of rising water levels and things like that, which obviously sort of really impact upon everybody in the novel hugely. So it's absolutely there. Yeah.
To draw a comparison between the human sphere and the natural sphere, Darwin got the first germ of the idea of evolution through natural selection by looking at the finches on the Galapagos, and how in these islands that were not separated by huge amounts of space, but were sufficiently distant from each other to have grown apart evolutionarily, that the finches had different, they filled different niches, and they had different beaks and different claws and completely different habits. They've grown into separate, there've been speciation events, they've grown into separate species very close together. And I wanted to do that in the Cody books. I wanted the sense that because the world is so dangerous and so difficult to traverse, that going 5 or 10 miles from where you live, you're suddenly in a completely different space with different culture, different stories, different traditions, which you see. That's a big part of the second book, I think, as they find many fishes and adapt to life there.
Have you ever had any kind of feedback from readers in Halifax, Mike?
Only online. A couple of people have said that they're Halifax born and bred, and that they really enjoyed seeing Halifax portrayed in that way. There's no hard feelings.
So Aliya, someone whose name I don't know, but says, thanks for spoiling us with 2 books this year. And indeed, all of the questions, and I should be very clear, are coming with thanks to both of you and enthusiasm and a lot of praise for the books. A quick question on Skyward Inn. Were you tipping a nod to the writer Jeff Dyer by naming a Skyward Inn regular after him?
No, I wasn't. No. Wow. I should have done that, actually. I should have named all the regulars after people I knew, but no, that didn't occur to me. Just a happy coincidence.
And another anonymous question, but should I read Jamaica Inn in order to properly appreciate Skyward Inn, or is the connection more tenuous, flavoring rather than direct conversation?
It's a tenuous connection. I mean, there's a character name that's shared, and there's the sense of isolation, and there's some sort of smuggling and wrecking behavior. It's got more in common actually with a different Daphne du Maurier novel, which I think is the last one she wrote, called Rule Britannia, which is about the West Country deciding to no longer be part of the United Kingdom, being taken over by American troops, in fact. So that du Maurier was very much in my mind throughout, and I think that's probably why the Jamaica Inn kind of reference came about. But it was more trying to, I love Daphne du Maurier, and I was trying to capture something of that in the writing, particularly early on, as I was trying to sort of get a foothold into the story. Yeah. But you wouldn't need to know Jamaica Inn to read the book.
I'd admit I haven't read Jamaica Inn, and I very much enjoyed. So, and I think that's another piece around smaller areas breaking away, and what happens into the future there around other people being interested in them. So for both of you, and again, another thanks for an anonymous attendee of the webinar. Sorry, no, it's a question for Mike, but I think both of you, there's a lot in there for both of you. Your work seems to explore a lot of metaphysical ideas. Have philosophy and or theology had a big impact on your writing?
Yeah, yes, they have. So certainly theology has. I grew up in Liverpool. I'm an atheist, I should say, out of the gate. But I grew up in Liverpool, which at a time when the sectarian divide in Liverpool was still very strong. I think it's less so now. But my dad was a lapsed Catholic. My mum was Anglican, and that was kind of, it was a fraught situation. My mother's family a lot of the time tried to pretend that my dad didn't exist. I used to see the Orange Parade on the 12th of the glorious 12th, kids dressed as William and Mary, and people in the crowd throwing pepper in the kids' eyes. So I grew up sort of like saturated in religion, but also often seeing the worst side of religion, you know, the kind of the ways in which you can divide communities. But having said that, I absolutely love the stories. We went to Sunday school. We went to Sunday school on Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday a lot of the time, because there were lots of different religious foundations that had these outreach programs for kids. And the main reason why we go to them is because they always gave you chocolate at the end. If you stayed through the hymns and the sermons and stuff and the Bible stories, you get a Kit Kat or a club, Jacob's Club or something. You know, the phrase rice Christian, the Christian missionaries who would give rice to people if they came to a mass. We were chocolate bar Christians, but it meant I also got loads of exposure to the stories. I love the stories, and I've often used them as a sort of basis in my own writing for exploring ideas about free will and predestination in Lucifer, or ideas about personal versus public imposed moralities, or whatever. The Bible has often been sort of like my starting point. And then much later in life, I was exposed to the writings of Bergson, Santayana, and briefly became an animist. So there's a lot of animist philosophy in the background of my stuff, even though now I no longer sort of, I'm not a believer anymore. But it's kind of like, it's part of the furniture in my head. So that was a very long-winded answer.
Wow.
No, I mean, absolutely. My parents were, well, one of them was Church of Ireland, one of them was Roman Catholic, and my father's family, who were still very much in Belfast, this was all in Dublin in the early 70s, they refused to come to the wedding on the grounds that walking into a Catholic church, something terrible might happen to them. So you know, while we didn't have obviously orange parades in Dublin, I very much empathize with that. Albeit they were then both very pro ecumenism when John Paul II was doing all of that stuff in the 80s and onwards. But yeah, a rich vein, I think, and certainly in my experience, we Sunday school was Church of Ireland only when we would occasionally go to their services, and the Catholic view was very much the story they were going to tell you with the lesson you were going to take from it.
Yeah. Wow.
Aliya,
not at all. No. I was sent to Sunday school religiously, funnily enough, every Sunday, but I found out years later that it was just to give my parents some peace and quiet on a Sunday morning, not at all religious in any way at all. Much like you, Mike, I started off loving Bible stories, and I remember one of the first books I bought with my own money was a book of Bible stories. Just fascinated with the pictures more than anything, because the pictures were horrendous for some of them, really horrific, as close as I could get to horror at that point, sort of terrible plagues and viruses and all the things I liked. I think I'm hugely interested in philosophy and asking philosophical questions. That's a big part of why I'm writing, is to try and answer these unanswerable questions. Nobody's managed it for thousands of years. I don't know why I'm trying, but I just love big questions. So that's what I write about. And I think they would probably be called philosophical issues. Yeah.
I think very much so. I mean, there were echoes in intentional or otherwise in some of the later parts of Skyward Inn that certainly made me think of pieces of the Narnia Chronicles.
Oh wow!
And also on, I know it can be a strange comparison, but Speaker for the Dead as well, or pieces in there come into that, all of which were obviously.
Yeah, I love that book. Yeah.
So we have two more questions in here, and I think we'll just try and maybe just try and address them and finish the questions, and then just kind of closing remarks at that point in time. So one of them we have from Luke Zinger again is, if either of you could write for an existing IP, what would it be?
Well, I've done it a lot because I started.
Are there any you haven't
comics,
written for, Mike? Yeah.
So I got to write in the Sandman universe, which was wonderful. I got to write X-Men for many years, which I loved. So yeah, it's the stock in trade for comics writers.
Yeah, not at all. I don't think my brain works that way. I don't tend to think of other people's universes as places I want to explore, or do you know what I mean? I do really love creating, and I rarely get the urge to ever revisit anything after I'm done with it and created it. So, and I really love other people's worlds and other people's universes, but I love them so much I don't kind of want to put my foot in them. Yeah.
I think if I was going to go into somebody else's IP in prose fiction, I would love to write a Bas Lag novel or a Bas Lag short story. You know, the world of Perdido Street Station and the Scar and Iron Council. The Scar in particular is one of my favorite books. I just absolutely love it.
Okay, cool. And the last question from Fiona. Thank you for the webinar. It's a fascinating insight into two of my favorite authors. So just a quick question. What are you both currently reading?
But funnily enough, Ursula Le Guin came up earlier. I've been reading her collected novellas, kind of like it's a great big collected novella called The Found and the Lost. And I've just been immersing myself in that. It's pretty amazing.
I've just finished reading Micaiah Johnson's The Space Between Worlds, which is a stunning debut novel about a woman who travels between dimensions as her job. So it's set in a world where they've discovered dimensional travel. But the thing is, you can't go into an alternate world if you're still alive in the other world. So there's suddenly a need to find people who've lived incredibly precarious lives, people who've grown up in war zones or in conditions of incredible deprivation, because on most other worlds they're dead. So they become the explorers. It's an amazing book. It just keeps on surprising.
Oh wow, that sounds really interesting.
Yes. What was the name again there?
Highly recommended. The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson.
Okay, cool. I should actually say, just because I want to enthuse about it, just before I read the books prior to this, your novels, Charlie Jane Anders' City in the Middle of the Night. I haven't read that yet. Absolutely adored. Very, very good, and very different to your own books. Not set on Earth, but I would highly recommend it. Okay. So we're just coming towards the end now. So I suppose for me, and to both of you, are there things you went, we're coming on this webinar this evening, or talk about this, there's something is there anything you really wanted to say that you haven't said or thought you wanted to explore?
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, no, I think we're pretty good, apart from buy all the books.
Yeah, buy our books. Definitely buy
yes. So I was going to say, absolutely. So Skyward Inn came out on the 16th of March, and Fall of Cody came out on the 23rd of March, available in all your favorite ways of buying books.
Apart from the, physically in-person kind.
Well, I mean, I believe there are places in the world you can go into bookshops. Well, certainly none of them are Dublin anyway. None of them are Ireland. But
I've heard of such places. I don't think they exist.
Yeah,
it's a myth.
Whole buildings full of books which you can buy and the things and borrow as well. So borrowable or buyable, hopefully from all places where good books are sold or lent or otherwise. So yes, with that, we got some more thank yous from various people. So with that, then I think we're going to come to the end of this webinar. So it falls to me to, of course, thank the two of you so much for your time this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And as you said, I can only highly recommend the books that we've been talking about this evening. And I'm certainly now going to go and check out all the other things by both of you that I haven't read before now. So thank you so much. Thanks, of course, to Rebellion and Orbit Books for facilitating this from the publishers' side of things. And from a Glasgow in 2024 point of view, I'd like to thank all of you who have viewed and will watch, and indeed those of you who will view it in the future. It will be available on YouTube to watch from shortly after this event closes. Our next event is the 17th of April at the same kind of time, 7 p.m. in the evening, and that's a Solaris satellite spotlight. So that's Primi Mohammed, Wayne Santos, and Derek Nunson with Rebellion Publishing. And the tickets are available on Eventbrite. The links are in our social media. This weekend coming is EasterCon online, which is the British National Science Fiction Convention. We would all love to be in Birmingham, of course, but we will be at our computers instead. But also Glasgow in 2024 will have an exciting reveal in our social media on the 3rd of April. And we'll also have a fan table at EasterCon where you can come and talk to us. And also, if you're going to a different convention, if you're going to Norwestcon in the US, which is also online, we'll also have a presence there. So please do come, say hi, and perhaps think about visiting the website and signing up to support the Glasgow in 2024 bid as we come ever closer to the vote, which will be in 2022. And of course, volunteering, because all of these events are run by volunteers and greatly appreciated. So that's the sales pitch done and dusted. So I'm going to say thank you to Mike and thank you to Aliya one more time for your time this evening. It's been a great pleasure, and I look forward to continuing this discussion, perhaps in a pub or convention bar. I can dream big.
That would be amazing.
At some point.
Thank you, Brad.
Cool. Thanks very much, folks.
Cheers, guys.
Good
Bye.
night.
Thanks.